One of the most important game franchises for us English-speaking folks in the Western world has got to be Twisted Metal. Yes, I say Western world because even though games like Twisted Metal do have a small dedicated fan base in Japan and other parts of Europe, it's nothing compared to the hardcore following it gets in the UK, and even that is nothing compared to its American numbers. Yep, I always thought the series was pretty big, and you know what? It was, but in the States, PlayStation owners lapped this series up, even getting, for better or worse, several exclusive titles too. Twisted Metal is right up there and stands head and shoulders with my favourite gaming IPs. Sure, not every release is as top quality as others, but the world of Twisted Metal has always been incredibly addictive, and as a bit of a horror fan, especially in my teen years, getting to experience the joys of playing as a mass murdering clown with fire hair was an experience I didn't know I wanted to control, but hey, PlayStation gave me that chance anyway. But before you start questioning the mindset of me, perhaps you should wait a bit, because today, ladies and gentlemen, I plan to show you just how addicted the Western world is with this series. I am not alone. So, join me as we take a look at the entire franchise that is Twisted Metal, where we look into the game's troubled beginnings, its inspiration, its possible future, and of course, the games. Welcome to Slope's Game Room. Twisted Metal, PlayStation's longest running exclusive IP. Sure, it hasn't seen a new release on the current PlayStation 4 generation as of yet, and looking at interviews with the creator, it doesn't look like it's going to either. But, you know, that's fine. It hit pretty big speed bumps back in 2012 with the most recent, excellent but badly named Twisted Metal, which found its way onto PlayStation 3. And for me, it was the perfect send-off until, you know, they go VR with it or something. Only joking. I think this final game did everything the series has needed to up to this point, and in my opinion, I think it's about time that we start opening up the doors of this incredible backstory of Twisted Metal into other styles and mediums. However, if this newly greenlit Twisted Metal TV show does go ahead, which I really hope it does, in my opinion, that is the way to go. But hold up, because TV shows based on video games that haven't even started filming yet? Yes, I think we're in fact getting a little ahead of ourselves, guys. So, let's go back to the beginning. This is David Jaffe, a young aspiring movie director from Birmingham in Alabama who, as time went on, actually ended up in San Diego, California with the hopes and dreams of making movies. Sadly for him at the time, this didn't happen, but it wasn't for a lack of trying. Whilst David spent his time sending off scripts for movies in the hope that he would be noticed, he ended up getting himself a job in video game testing, you know, to pay them bills. And the company that he worked with was none other than Sony ImageSoft. And here we are, guys. Already he has found the big turn that would change his life. He wanted to tell stories and push his directive flair, but as stated, it wasn't happening for him. However, what was happening was the story-driven world of video games. Sure, this has been going on since the early text-adventure days of the past, but right now, this was when he realised the potential and saw it as a new way to show off his talents. And why not, right? He wanted to be creative and create worlds that would pull you, the viewer, in, and what better way to do it than with video games? Plus, he was already getting paid to play them anyway, so you know, why the hell not? A couple of those games that he tested on were none other than Skyblazer and Cliffhanger, before designing titles such as the incredible Mickey Mania. And do I love this game. Mickey Mania, the very, very best Mickey Mouse game if you ask me. But moving away from the cutesy world of Disney and Mickey Mouse, it was actually his very next game that pushes this story into first gear. The original Twisted Metal. The year was 1994 and Sony was getting ready to release the PlayStation in Japan. Nintendo were obviously trembling in their boots at another rather large company entering the console ring, and rightfully so. David had by this point become a bit of a fan of gaming, and as a tester got to experience different sorts of games from different parts of the world. I already mentioned Sky Blazer for the Super Nintendo, that was great, as was Hook, another game that David managed to get his hands on early on. The way he saw it was that these Eastern created games were simply top notch. However, games such as Cliffhanger, not so much. He saw a real divide on what was good and what was not, and that divide was partly based on location, where the game was actually being created. Why were the Japanese created games, for the most part, so much better? Why couldn't we do it that good? Well, this got the backs up of quite a few local game developers, and before you know it, he built himself up a little bit of a troublemaking reputation. But as stated, he had already started working his way up the ranks from game tester to game producer, and that upcoming PlayStation really did open his eyes as to what the future of gaming could bring. Anyway, whilst David's own team members constantly found themselves in the manager's office complaining about David, Sony themselves were very much looking for new games to be developed for the new system that was going to be released towards the back end of the very next year. It was at this point that those top dogs pulled David into their office and pitched the idea of getting hold of another development studio in Utah that didn't make video games. However, they did have experience in creating military simulated videos. All they needed was for someone like David to go in and turn those years of 3D world building knowledge into an actual game. But David, if you keep winding up the devs, you're out. This is your last chance. Evans and Sutherland was the company David, along with Mike Giam and Alan Becker, went to see, and that company had been pushing real-time user 3D interactivity for the longest time. Jumping from testing and producing 16-bit games to this was obviously mind-blowing to David, and he knew that he had to change his methods in regard to making a team, because if he was able to get this 3D world that he just experienced into a game and do it right, it would be the future of game development, and it's a future that David very much wanted to be a part of. Driving home from that very same meeting, David and his co-workers were obviously very excited, talking about what game he could make and possibilities that lay ahead of him, when they hit some serious traffic. And it was in that traffic that he joked about blowing away the congestion with big guns and bazookas, just like they did in films like Road Warrior, with crazy vehicles and wait a minute. Back at Sony ImageSoft, the team put their idea forward, and being it was a simpler time, they pretty much got it greenlit and the project started development right away. And although the game wasn't known as Twisted Metal then, but instead Battle Cars, it was an exciting time for the team, with some of the members from Evans and Sutherland forming the company called Single Track. Now, Single Track wasn't just making battle cars, they was also making Warhawk, a game that took heavy inspiration from arcadey-like titles such as Star Fox and Afterburner, before blending them into a more computer flight sim type game. Originally, this aerial combat shooter was actually going to be included into Twisted Metal, but that obviously didn't happen. Regardless, looking after two big combat games like this at the very early days of 3D game making proved to be quite difficult, and one of the heads at Sony said that they just had to stop. A coin flip was done, giving David the deciding vote, and he decided to continue to lead a team for Twisted Metal, whilst Mike Giam went off to head up Warhawk. Even though the two games were very wisely split into two separate teams, they still did from time to time work together and offered up effects, part of the game's code and sound design, but they were still very much their own games, and the marketing peeps at Sony had no issue proving that point. Boy oh boy did they love Warhawk. This was going to be the system seller, and that Battle Cars game, take it or leave it, but Warhawk, man, For whatever reason, perhaps it's because you're flying in this one and that's a tad more exciting for early day 3D engines. But whatever that reason may have been, nobody seemed to be interested at all in battle cars. And the playtesters, they hated it too. Why? Was it really that bad? Well, it seems that all actually came down to how the game was pitched and designed in the first place. Now, when you hear Twisted Metal, you think, I don't know, Mario Kart's battle mode with bigger guns, right? Sure, I mean, according to an interview with Retro Gamer magazine, inspiration did actually come from places like Mario Kart's battle modes and the 1985 shoot 'em up auto duel, the odd car chase scene from movies, and even the card game Car Wars. It all makes sense, right? Well, originally it was actually touted as a Mortal Kombat game, but with cars, with a little bit of Doom injected into it too. And sure, I suppose that also makes sense when you really think about it, but if you're like me, it's not your first thought, and Sony actually brought in hardcore Street Fighter players in to test out Twisted Metal. Feedback was super harsh, to the point where David seriously thought his career was over before it had even begun. On top of this, the Japanese arm at Sony really didn't like the dirty, gritty, stylized look of the game and asked for the weapons to be changed for fruit, where you actually shoot apples instead of grenades. Everything was going against this game, and David remembers calling his wife to say that he needs to go and find another job. He was so unsure on how the public would take it even during its release. The game cost the best part of $850,000, which I'm sure you will all agree isn't exactly an enormous budget, and because of that, it didn't seem like it was going to be the biggest issue if it failed. Well, not for Sony at least, but still, David was worried. Sony knew they had something, and the relationship with Single Track really did work out quite well, and even though a sequel was instantly put forward, it wasn't the sequel we all know and lovingly remember, because, well, everybody was unsure about this game. There was even a time when the sequel to Twisted Metal was going to be a flooded New York City where you fight each other with floating taxis. There was another that saw a whole lot of slowdown, and it made you an insect where you combat other insects, but you know, when those sales numbers for Twisted Metal did come in, all those random ideas just drifted away. And one of the PlayStation's earliest success stories was, of course, Twisted Metal. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, I think it's about time that we look at the first game in the PlayStation's longest running IP. Now, honestly, there's two ways to look at this game, the 1996 way or the 2019 way. Let's start with 1996, shall we? If you wanted to show off a game via PlayStation 1 in its early days, I personally think you had quite a lot to choose from. It was released with titles such as Jumping Flash, the original Wipeout and Ridge Racer for us Brits, and you only had to wait 3 or 4 months before you got titles that really did anger the parents. For me, I was the perfect age. I got my PlayStation 1 on Christmas of 1995, and would you believe it, I actually jumped ship from my beloved Sega after seeing a family friend playing Wipeout. For me, a system playing games that looked like that was the future. And as a teen moving away from cutesy platforming games and my Beano reading days, I started playing games like Loaded and reading grittier comics such as Judge Dredd. Well, only 1 month later, in January of 1996, I put together all of that money that I had accumulated over Christmas, went to the shops and bought the baddest game I found on the shelves, the original Twisted Metal. And let me tell you guys, back in January of 1996, this game was 10 out of 10 in my eyes, because I knew no better. It's Christmas Eve of 2005 and the mysterious Calypso is holding his 10th annual Twisted Metal contest. It's simple enough, you choose one of 12 characters at your disposal, all with varying degrees of offense and defensive skills, and the last one standing after the final boss minion gets to have his or her wish granted, no matter how ridiculous it may be. Sadly, the final cutscenes that were filmed in super cheesy B-movie vision were actually cut due to the nature of them, and to be more specific, the bikini-clad ladies at the front. The single-track studio that was working on the game actually had quite a few hardcore religious folk on the team, and although they didn't seem to mind too much about all of the blood and guts, they weren't too happy about these girls. However, you can actually find these cutscenes as added extras in a future release that we will get to eventually. These endings, which ended up just being text, sadly, in the original release, actually serve as the perfect way to end a game like this, and will make you want to work your way through the game with each character. Calypso does indeed grant the wish, however he does so in a way that twists what they actually want, and it always ends up bad. I gotta say, I loved reading and eventually watching these endings. The handling in this game is obviously not very lifelike at all. You can really see that first person shooting Doom style being forced into a car style game here, and it takes some getting used to. But when you do, it's not bad. You got 6 arenas of varying sizes, and as they go on, they grow in size and ridiculousness. All in all, with a crazy amount of free time on my hands, it was a whole heap of fun. I look back on this game very, very fondly. I had some great nights playing it myself and showing off the power of PlayStation to anyone that underestimated it. But moving into 2019, I mean, come on. It's pretty much a launch title to a franchise that's most recent release was only a few years ago. Twisted Metal has been improved upon a crazy amount, and besides the odd curiosity, I don't really see much of a reason to go back to this original one, as it's now insanely hard, extremely clunky, and you know what, it's not that nice to look at either. But before moving on to what was my favourite of the PlayStation 1 era, here's a couple more facts about this game. Originally, it was intended to be single player. However, approximately 2 months before it was released, one of the devs came in at the weekend to see if he could get a split screen function working, and he did. David actually stated that it was this last minute feature that may have given the series the long lasting appeal that it now has. Early on, the game was known as Battle Cars, as already stated, but that name also changed during development several times, from High Octane Urban Assault, Cars and Rockets, and even went under the development name of Firestorm 2. And finally, David Jaffe and the majority of higher-ups on his team actually don't look back on this game too fondly either. Look, for its time, it was great, but as stated, as time moves on, so did the improvements, and with that, well, I think it's about time we look at this game's sequel, to many, the very best game in the series. The second game took 16 months to complete, which was a whole lot longer than the original, and that extra time was well worth it. Twisted Metal 2, or Twisted Metal World Tour as it was known in my neck of the woods, and Twisted Metal X in Japan, takes everything that mad first game did great and pushes it. The team knew what they had and they just now needed to refine it. Needless to say, when I got this game, I practically never put in that original ever again. Everything about the game was perfect, and still to this day, besides the still pretty clunky although highly improved graphics, it's a real joy to play. And yes, just like everybody else, my favourite level was the one set in Paris where you can literally blow up the Eiffel Tower, watch it collapse and build yourself a new playground on the rooftops. The way they implemented a slightly tighter control scheme and the ability to assign weapons to directions of the D-pad, again something heavily inspired by one-on-one fighting games like Street Fighter. The levels were bigger and better designed, it had some excellent hidden extras, and for me the icing on the cake was obviously the cutscenes. The desperation to complete each character to see how their one wish would be used against them for the most part made this whole experience incredibly addictive. My god, this game was the whole package. The destructible world, the new art style, it was just the perfect Twisted Metal game. For most people, it wouldn't get better than this, and although I actually do think the best game in the series is yet to come, not one other game sold as well as this entry.
Style, sophistication, the ability to launch napalm into oncoming traffic. If these are the things you look for in an automobile, it's time you test drive Twisted Metal 2. Fully automated weaponry, dual rocket launchers, and the new APS flamethrowing system. All standard. Drive the 1997 Twisted Metal 2 on PlayStation from Sony, and let style be your weapon.
As stated, the second game in the Twisted Metal franchise was the one that most believe is the best, and I'm sure that any fan of this series will tell you there is possibly another reason for that too. The next game, well, actually the next two games were not that good, and on top of this, the whole car combat genre had got pretty much swamped since then too. The previously complete historied Carmageddon took the genre into a different direction, which was great. Single Track themselves had moved on from working with Sony and joined GT Interactive, releasing their own vehicular combat game called Rogue Trip, again pretty good. Mixing the Twisted Metal formula with a sort of crazy taxi gameplay mechanic, Ubisoft had to go with their game Scars, which was, completely forgettable, and then of course you've got Vigilante 8, which again was pretty good. What I'm getting at was that everybody wanted a piece of the sweet tooth cake, and even though Single Track themselves went off to do their own thing, and even David Jaffe himself leaving the series behind to work on his new game called Dark Guns, a game so bad in his own opinion that it cost Sony $3 million to make and never even got released, Sony knew they had to keep churning out these gorgeously gory Twisted Metal titles, which is exactly what they did by having 989 Studios take the role, leading us into Twisted Metal 3 and Twisted Metal 4.
Did you hear? Sweet Tooth got parole today.
Yeah, I thought that clown was in for life. Sweet Tooth got out today.
He's probably living the high life.
Circuses, birthday parties.
No, actually, he's driving an ice cream truck.
Get out of town.
Sweet Tooth is back in Twisted Metal 3 with enough weapons to make any angry driver happy.
You go, Sweet Tooth.
PlayStation.
Pop the hood. The hood.
It's Twisted Metal 4, and Sweet Tooth is large and in charge with all the high-octane attitude you've come to know and love.
989 Studios.
Now guys, we are finally at a stage where I can honestly say I didn't play these ones back in the day because they were North American exclusive. Heck, I didn't even know they existed until the birth of the internet, and obviously with that in mind, I have no real rose-tinted connection to these games, but still, believe me when I say, yeah, they're alright. Seriously, researching these titles, there seems to be quite a few people that actually do love them, but the vast majority don't. There is some definite positives like, the Rob Zombie soundtrack, how the second game made by 989 is a whole lot better than the first, similar to World Tour I suppose in that sense. But like I said, by this point the market had been overrun with copycats, and for the most part they did it better, as this took what was the perfect road to a series of hugely memorable titles and completely ruined them. Seriously, I really do wish this game was its own thing, because all I can see, and it seems like the vast majority of the online community agrees, is a huge, unforgiving misuse of the Twisted Metal IP. As we move away from David's failed game and what many people believe is the worst of the series, the rumblings of a new system was underway, the PlayStation 2. David was one of the people that headed up Sony's new Santa Monica studio and was tasked with creating new content for the new system. The original team started to perk up during the rise of this new system, and when they did, for the most part, they collectively reformed once again, and a brand new Twisted Metal game was an obvious choice. A new smaller team of those previous team members were formed under the name Incog Inc., and finally the wheels for what many believe is the true third entry in the series started to turn. One of the original ideas was to make a simple, straight up follow-up to the second and best-selling game in the series, taking the series back on a sort of road tour with Sweet Tooth taking a bit more of a starring role. However, at this time, David was also becoming a bit obsessed with the darker psychological side of horror and the disturbing photography of Joel Peter Witkin. As you can no doubt see from this imagery, it was the eventual inspiration for Twisted Metal Black, my personal favourite entry in the series. So, as you can see, this is Twisted Metal, but for grown-ups, the first game in the series to get an M rating. And although sadly us Brits actually ended up losing the majority of the cutscenes compared to the lucky Americans, it didn't take away from the final product. The game was incredibly well defined, had excellent mechanics, was the perfect style moving into the new generation, and to this day, I still boot up this game from time to time. The way the cars have weapons that actually show up rather than just launch from the front of your polygon car, the way each character had been drastically redesigned, simply everything about this game was perfect for a fan of the series. And yes, even though the controls were extremely strange, involving you to accelerate and reverse with one analog and whilst turning left and right with the other, it did work out if you put the time in, and it worked out really well. Why? Because again, this is not a driving game, this is a fighting game on wheels, and when creating something like that you need to mix up the gameplay style. And this game does it incredibly in 60 frames a second in the fastest Twisted Metal to date. Oh, and by the way, David and supposedly other members of his team actually did not like the speed of this game. They got used to it during development, but when it was released, they realised that it was just simply too fast, preferring the take your time and decide how you're going to take on the enemy approach of the second game. However, for me, I much prefer the speed. Also, due to its speed, I also found this game to be the best in multiplayer, and although I have never played it online, as it was a feature only implemented in later revisions of the game, or as a free send away in certain parts of the world, the videos I have seen online prove that this was an extremely crazy fast time, similar to watch, I suppose, to the best players duking it out in something like Smash Brothers. And what's the best about all of this? There are still people playing this game on dedicated servers to this very day. Perhaps it was because I had more time back then and my PlayStation 2 was still pretty new, but for me, no combat racing game ever did it better than Black. All I need now is to get hold of that American release so I can experience the, although crude by today's standards, rather excellent sounding cutscenes.
Military school won't be so bad. I will call you every day. You'll see. The year will go by fast.
But it really was the truck.
Rated P for teen.
Strangely enough, the series actually found its way back to the PlayStation 1 only a few months after the release of Twisted Metal Black, and it was made by the same development studio, although a different team within that studio. Starting right near the end of Black's development, Jaffe always wanted to create a sort of jokey, juvenile teen comedy version that was still rated M, of course, of the original Twisted Metal games. And that kinda sounds great. A game that uses the same engine as the original where you drive mini remote control cars, but sadly David wasn't that involved past giving the main ideas, as he'd now gone off to work on God of War. The end result is a game that actually isn't too bad, but sadly it came at a time when I had personally moved on to the grittier world of Twisted Metal Black, and this just seemed like a slightly downgraded version of Twisted Metal World Tour. For me, there's no real reason to play this, which I couldn't anyway, because guess what? It's an American exclusive, which also goes for Twisted Metal Head-On, released for the PSP. Now, honestly, there really isn't anything that wrong with this game. I picked it up for the first time in forever for this review, but instantly I remembered what was wrong with it. And similar to other early PSP titles, it was simply a lesser version of another game. The idea in this one is that Calypso is setting up another world tournament around the world just like he did in number 2. In fact, this game is technically a sequel to that game, and some people even see it as the third true entry. And I suppose they would actually be right. The gameplay feels slightly more like Black than the original 2 games, but not quite as good and nowhere near as challenging. And the story and environments is similar to number 2, but again, not quite as good as that game either. The end result is a really solid title in all honesty, but it's a solid title that had been done before in my eyes, is, and those other games did it better. Sure, for the time it was amazing to take Twisted Metal on the go, but let's not kid ourselves. It's not as good as anything you'd want to be playing on a home console. However, one awesome aspect to the game was the story mode, which, kind of did follow on from the events of number 2, as you would expect. But unlike that game, I actually, for the first time, wasn't that worried about taking on every challenger. Technically, I suppose it actually is better than number 2, but I'd moved on to better things entirely. Look, it is a good game, and heck, it did implement a few cool ideas like mini-games and collecting power-ups from fallen foes. Also, it did get a re-release on the PlayStation 2 as well, which is easily the definitive edition, although annoyingly American exclusive again. It just wasn't for me. It wasn't the jump that 1 to 2 was, or 2 to Black was, even though it came out a good few years after Black. Make no mistake, it sits perfectly in between 2 and Black, and for some people that's fine. For me, however, I was still waiting for David to stop making God of War games and instead take Twisted Metal, pushing it much further once again, as he always did.
Today, we're working on the principle of a good flower arrangement. Every hostess knows it's your flowers that really give a party the right look, the right freshness. It's your flowers that say, I'm in control, I love myself, my family, and my home. So here's what to do. To create a beautiful arrangement, take 3 flowers and cut as appropriate. There. That's lovely. It's really important to consider the overall shape of your design. Cut just so.
But with all those negativities out of the way, with that said, however, there is one feature in this game that does make it worth your while. You see, at some point, Twisted Metal Black 2, or Twisted Metal Black Part 2, and eventually Twisted Metal Harbor City, it was eventually known, did in fact start development. In fact, it got quite a way into development, and this little extras shows off just some of that game's questionable choices. You see, there was actually an on-foot section for this incredible looking Sweet Tooth area, and there was going to be a preacher bit too, although that's not seen here. And in this little add-on, you get to walk up to loads of flaming heads to basically get some sort of history lesson on the entire Twisted Metal franchise. Similar, I suppose, to the sort of thing they did in the Left 4 Dead games. There is also the endings from the original games that were cut that I showed earlier, and a short documentary about the franchise too. But what's probably most interesting is the letter you get to read when you complete this mini version of Black 2. Why was it cancelled? Well, according to the game itself, it was due to several members of the team dying in a plane crash that happened on March the 13th, 2005. But that's not entirely true. In fact, it's not true at all. From what I can tell, this version of the game was actually in development before Head On. David wasn't even involved due to God of War, and when Sony was getting set to release the PSP, the team moved on to work on a different Twisted Metal game for that system, aka Twisted Metal Head On. And it was when they went back to this game, Harbor City, when Scott Campbell, the other Twisted Metal co-founder, decided that it was too late, as he and David got back together to create their own studio, Eat, Sleep, Play, and by doing so, it killed what had already been worked on up to this point with this Twisted Metal Black sequel. Sony could have gone to another team perhaps to finish it off, but due to, I assume, legal reasons, the game not being very good or just not wanting to finish it at all, whatever the reason, they decided against it. Nobody knows for sure, heck, even David in interviews doesn't know, and that's just the way it is. Sadly, however, looking back at the Dark Past documentary, eagle-eyed gamers will notice throughout flashes of numbers appearing during that documentary. Well, if you assign those numbers to a letter of the alphabet, it will spell out the following words: Twisted Metal is coming to PlayStation 3. which is exactly what happened. Twisted Metal, as it was badly named. My god, I hate it when they revamp a franchise and use the original name again, which forces you to say things like Twisted Metal 2012 or something like that. I hate it!
Where was the skill? Where was the strategy? I mean, shoot, drive, nothing.
Those games had both skill and strategy. You're racing in a city, going 100 miles per hour, blasting everything as you go. Speed, strategy, skill. Those games were awesome.
Maybe back in your day, sweetheart, but look, you name me one car combat game that was as good on PlayStation 1, kicked ass on PlayStation 2, and kicked even more ass on PS3. The ultimate ass kicking. Name it. That's right. You can't do it because it doesn't exist. Now get back to work, punk.
I'm the punk.
Don't kick my cab.
Punk.
Light 'em up, boys.
Twisted Metal was, back in 2012, for a new generation of hardware on the PlayStation 3, probably the best version to play. Honestly, I prefer black, but hey, what can I say? I'm nostalgic. The gameplay is definitely more solid here, and online multiplayer became good eventually. You see, during its initial release, the game was heavily promoted online, but sadly it didn't play too well online, constantly stopping people from joining matches, and when they constantly dropped them out of matches. Without a doubt, it hurt the sales of the game overall, and for people like me that really enjoyed the storyline aspect of the game, well, there's good and bad to that too. The new real-life, almost SimCity-esque cutscenes for each character are absolutely incredible, probably the best in the whole series. The only problem was, there was only 3 characters to choose from, and it didn't take too long to see all of them, resulting in early adopters not being able to play online for the most part, and not having the best experience offline either. Thankfully, the online issues did get fixed, and for the multiplayer style alone, the game was eventually 100% worth it. The game during its development actually was going to be called Twisted Metal Wasteland, taking place in ruins of other games. However, Steve fought against the idea and it got changed into a more classic style of Twisted Metal game. In fact, originally it was simply going to be a download-only title, but when Sony saw how great the development was, they decided to make it into a full release. Besides the obvious upgrades in graphics and loads more excellently created story modes, for me it was the perfect way to go. Sure, Sweet Tooth and the rest of the Twisted Metal crew lives on in games such as PlayStation All-Stars and as Funko Pops, obviously. I mean, why not? He's probably gaming's greatest horror character ever. David, Steve and the rest of the crew and all of the studios that had a hand in making these Twisted Metal games throughout their development have truly made something that any PlayStation fan would be truly proud of. For me, PlayStation just wouldn't be PlayStation without this series, and I honestly can't get enough. Fingers crossed that the soon-to-be created Twisted Metal TV show helps build on the world even more, and perhaps it will help open the wallets of the guys up top at Sony, because Twisted Metal on PlayStation 4 sounds like the kind of nightmare that I really want to experience. Hey guys! Thanks for checking out the video. I want to give a big special shout out to this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Yes, thank you very much, guys, for sponsoring the show. I do highly suggest you go down there and do the 2-month trial, so you can, you know, go and check out anything that you're interested in, and, you know, basically school yourself up. Like I said, I have been using it myself to find out how to boost my Instagram a little bit more, so go and, you know, follow me over on Instagram to see what I've been doing with that. And yeah, I highly suggest you go over there, especially if you're starting a Kickstarter. You could do a lot worse than a 2-month free trial, couldn't you? Yes. But anyway, guys, let's get over to the Patreons that help out every single episode, with a big special shout out going to Gary Pinkett, That Retro Video Gamer, Mantis, Ryan Burford, Andrew Dalton, Ben Jackson, Jonathan Hayward, Kevin Kong, Christopher Turnbull, Phil Lowland, Tomek Rabowski, Retro to Next Gen, Hawk89, Dina Robertson Dunn, Lefty Intrigued Gaming, Abby Morris, Tim Labonte, Asobi, Quang DX, Tim Lunn, Hananas, Pixels.Limited, aka Samuel Victor, Red the Beard, Conrad Constantine, Pretendo64, Creamy Elephants, Casey Garner, Blitz Hedgie, Kinglink Reviews, Gemma at Mr. T's Shirts, Wobbles and Bean, The Wonder Ducks, Yelled Hamburger, Right, Dan Petit, Mike H. Fell, Lucas Softail, Gregory Arden, Ronnie Method, SWP, Solex Captor, Jeremy Rodriguez, Nick Pollard, Bram Perez, Marcus Kingham McCut, Tyndall, June, The Geeky Dad, Richard Carter, aka Fantastic Dizzy, Todd, Paul, Float, G, and of course, Petty Mew. If you guys want to get your name shouted out, get your name shown, come and see what I'm working on, and all of the usual stuff that these patrons get all of the time, then, you know, why not click the link that you see on the screen? Don't forget to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, a thumbs down, whatever you prefer. If you are sharing this stuff over on places like Reddit and what have you, then obviously a massive thanks to you. Oh, yes, an extra big shout out goes out to the subreddit Shitty Kickstarters as well, because, you know, those guys over there are awesome. But anyway, that's enough for me. This is DJ Slope signing out, and hopefully I'll see you all next time.